how lovely it is that we're now at the stage of the day we can introduce Tammy Everts to the stage. Tammy, aside from being co-chair of this conference and putting together this wonderful program of speakers and content for us to enjoy, she's also Chief Experience Officer at Speed Curve and has done loads of work over the years. Sorry, that sounded like you really long in the tooth when I said that. I was emphasizing the amount of work, not the amount of years. I'll keep going, Philip. So much experience kind of researching how people use the web, how the experiences are influenced, and so much like learnings that comes from that. Also, of course, the author of the book Time is Money, the business value of web development, and we're certainly kind of acutely aware of how important that is. So, she's also pops up at lots of conferences. I've seen her kind of staffing stalls offering kind of free performance audits on people's sites and having people come along and say, help me. And she certainly does. And she would, in fact, I don't know if you're going to be doing that, but I know that Tammy's going to be at the Google stand tomorrow in the morning break, so you can chat to her there as well. But before that, of course, we get to hear from her right now. So talking about, the performance impacts and on the changing, how it's affected by the changing tech landscape, which of course changes all the time. A giant round of applause, I think, please, for Tammy Everts.
Thanks very much. That's a really nice introduction. Thanks, Phil. Can everyone hear me at the back? Oh, thank you. That's, there we go, getting the clicker to work. The slides is okay, readable. This might be a North American phrase. Who's familiar with this expression, work smarter, not harder? Okay. Years and years ago, maybe I am long in the tooth. Years and years ago, before I got involved in performance, at my first kind of big job where I had a large team and I was working as part of a big organization that I'm not going to name, there was a recession. It was the early aughts. There was a recession, as there is from time to time. We're in one now, arguably. We cut people. Our teams got smaller, all of those things, all those recession things happened. And we were expected to do not just the same things that we had always been doing, but in order to kind of justify our existence, we were almost expected to do more than we had been doing before with fewer resources. And I had a really great boss at the time. We all adored him. But we were frustrated and we were getting burned out and things like that. And so we called kind of a meeting with him, all of us who were managers, called a meeting with him just so that we could kind of express how we were feeling at the time. And he said, these are tough times. I expect you to work smarter, not harder. And as I said, I adored this man. He was amazing. But it's the angriest I've ever been in a professional environment. And this was just me on the inside, just raging. It was like, to a high-performing person, and it's not a brag to call myself that, where everybody in this room is probably a high performer. To a high-performing person, being told to work smarter, not harder, is possibly one of the most demotivating things you can hear, because it implies that up until this time, you've been working stupid. And nobody wants to think that about themselves. So I promise that in this talk, it's not going to be about working smarter, not harder. I hate that expression. I banned it from my life. So this is me. If you want to find me on Twitter and Mastodon, this is how you can find me and reach out to me after this talk if you have any questions or some feedback or some suggestions. I'm always trying to learn from other people as much as I'm trying to help you with things that I've learned. As Phil said, I wrote this book, and I co-curate WPO Stats, which is a repository of web performance case studies. There are a few of us who work on that. Tim started it, Tim Cadleck, who's also a co-chair here. Very small world. So if you are interested in web performance case studies where we prove, or people prove, the business value or the user engagement value of any web optimization projects, it's a good place to go. And I work at Speed Curve. We celebrate our 10th anniversary this month, as Mark mentioned earlier this morning. And I've been with the company for about 6.5 years, and I've been really, really lucky to help just like a lot of companies of all sizes. This is just a handful to make their sites faster and to learn how to make their sites faster and learn how to keep their sites from getting slower. And the thing that I've learned over the years is that performance is hard. Yeah. One of the things that I'll just kind of go back for a second. So when I started working at SpeedCurve, we were still in the beginning of kind of like the bubble. Like things are always bubbling and bursting and bubbling and bursting. And so we were bubble. So teams were large. People had lots of time, money, resources for investing in performance, investing in new tools, trying out new things, really having kind of the mental bandwidth to be really experimental. And that's changed. For a number of reasons. Kind of the elephant in the room, in this room, in all rooms, when conversation about the tech landscape comes up, is just, there have been layoffs. Teams are smaller. There have been reorgs. Org charts are really confusing, or you're just working with brand new people, or the person you used to report to, the performance champion in your organization, might no longer be with the organization. And also, with so much remote working happening, maybe you're just not even seeing each other face to face anymore. So there's just a lot of things that have changed in the past 6.5 years that I've been talking to different customers. And of course, we have this like rapidly evolving tech stack or rapidly growing tech stack. And of course, as I pull out this slide pretty much every conference that I do, more and more metrics, and people, don't know what they mean or why they matter or what they measure. And so we're just really tasked with learning a lot all the time. And one interesting kind of thing that I just read recently is Sauce Labs recently commissioned a study, or like a poll, of 500 developers. And one of the interesting takeaways from that poll is that 77% of developers have assumed more responsibility for testing in the past year. That's huge, and I see that playing out in the conversations that I'm having, where we have a lot of new users, people who are brand new to performance or brand new to performance testing and monitoring, and they're just trying to learn it all in addition to everything that they're already doing. It's a lot, trying to juggle it all, trying to keep everything going, trying to keep it all in the air. And I want to talk about how to manage that juggling and how to create impact. So you're not just keeping all the balls or chainsaws or whatever it is you juggle up in the air, but you're actually making a difference. And the core idea behind this is to kind of sit back from your situation. And I remember reading this like a while back and thinking, this really resonated for me, was that problems for the company represent opportunities for you as an individual to demonstrate impact. And what that really means is to kind of like not just think like, oh, that's a problem, but to actually like identify unsolved problems and really run toward them. And what I mean by that is, I put this slide in here to remind myself to say to all of you, the thing to keep in mind about performance, and we say this a lot, is just keep in mind that you're running towards these problems, but you're really kind of like marathon running. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and you're just trying to do what you're doing at a sustainable pace. So you can define unsolved problems by asking yourself a lot of questions. Things like, am I looking at the right metrics? Are my optimizations working? Are the things I'm doing working? Am I reporting as effectively as I could be to whoever needs to hear reports? Am I involving the right people? Am I involving them at the right time? Am I motivating my team? Am I motivated? Which is a really important question to ask yourself. And if you're not asking yourself that from time to time, I definitely suggest that you pause and do that. Maybe not right now, maybe later. Am I proving business value? Am I making my company care about performance? These are all these questions are potential unsolved problems that you can kind of sit down and ask yourself. And the reason why it's important to embrace this idea of chasing impact is that it's really a healthy mental model for your career, yes, but just in life to chase impact. It challenges your comfort zone, and it treats your skills as a means to an end, so that you always can feel, even on a hard day or a hard week or hard quarter, that you're working towards some measurable goal, some real outcome, something you're trying to improve, the impact that you're trying to create. What I'm going to talk about today is how to simplify that and how to recognize the fact that in this increasingly complex landscape where we are ironically sometimes working with fewer people and less time to do the things we need to do, how can we do this as easily as possible? And that kind of boils down to a bit of simplification. And I really believe in easy as a goal. And I don't think it's necessarily something we're going to get to overnight. But if you're not always asking yourself, how can I make this easier? How can I simplify this? You might be not doing yourself any favors. And so a couple of things to kind of think about and that I'm going to be talking about for the next little bit is just this idea of like, don't do the hard stuff until you've done the easy stuff. And if you're doing the hard stuff, make sure that the hard things you're doing are actually making a difference. Otherwise, you're kind of wasting your time. And those might sound like common sense things to say, but common sense, as probably most of us know by now, is actually kind of uncommon. We can get kind of so deep in the weeds of what we're doing and really down into the kind of nuanced bits and pieces of what we do day to day that we forget to ask ourselves, is this actually, am I doing the easy things first? And is what I'm doing having an impact? And there might be some of you for whom the things I'm about to say are like, you're going to say like, oh, I'm already doing that, and I'm doing that, and I'm doing that, and I'm doing that, and you literally check off all the boxes. To which I say, if this is you, if you are that person who's checked off all the boxes of things I'm about to say, please come and talk to me. I would like to know how you're managing to do it. And maybe you need to be on the stage next year delivering a case study. So the things I'm about to say are going to sound like common sense things. And hopefully as you're hearing them, you're like, oh yeah, obviously I should be doing that, or obviously I am doing that. So the obvious thing, focus on what matters. But how do you define what actually matters? There's this meme that's like it's been going on for a long time. Optimize all the things, whatever, all the things. And so quickly, just a little quick shout out. Everybody cites this meme, but nobody actually cites the source. This is a really amazing book, and this is a total tangential book recommendation. You read this book if you like laughing. I definitely recommend it. So you have to take a photo. Ali Brosh, she had a blog. It got turned into a book, and that book was so amazing. She wrote a sequel, and it's laugh out loud funny. So focusing on what matters. This is a waterfall chart. Most of you probably know what it is. For those of you who don't, it's kind of, I explain it to people as basically being kind of like a Gantt chart, but for your page. You're just showing all the different resources on the page as they render. And it's kind of showing you like top to bottom. You can see this is a page. You can't see actually in, maybe you can if you've got really good vision. This is a waterfall chart generated from synthetic text of the IKEA.com homepage. And I'm not picking on IKEA. This is actually a pretty fast page. So I'm not here to name and shame anybody. It's like good vibes only. So this is nevertheless a waterfall chart that has a lot of resources on it. So well over 100 resources. And what you might not be able to see is this bar right here that has the little the little yellow tags on it, that's showing where largest contentful paint is happening. And I kind of picked largest contentful paint because for this particular page, it's a metric that aligns with what users would see in the viewport in terms of really important content. So this is a lot of stuff. It's a lot of stuff. And if you were trying to optimize all these things, you would be working really, really hard and maybe not necessarily seeing any impact when you would expect to see impact. And the reason why is because all of these grayed out bits that happen after LCP don't necessarily matter as much as you might think that they would. The things that matter are the things that happen up to, sorry, I'm going to just step back for a second. The things that matter in terms of helping users know that they've landed on a page, the page is performant, the page is the right page they want to be on because it's showing them a picture of something they expected to see or wanted to see. So it's meeting that expectation. There's other things that are happening behind the scenes where you want to make sure the page is actually properly interactive. It doesn't just like appear, but it actually can function. But for our purposes right now, we're going to talk about making sure the page appears to be performant in rendering. So none of these things matter. So suddenly the waterfall, if you eliminate this grayed out bit, it's a much shorter list of resources. And 56 in total, which seems like a lot. And I've kind of like counted them all out for you. And you can see that there's a fair bit of blocking CSS, some blocking JavaScript, some other JavaScript, some images, and some custom fonts. So once you funneled your list down into everything that renders up to a certain point, you see that you're kind of it's a way to kind of manage what you need to do. A couple of people have talked about the critical rendering path today, and I'm really, really happy to hear that this concept is being revisited. It's not a new idea. Ilya Grigorik talked about this and kind of popularized the idea 10 years ago. And the idea of the critical rendering path is that you're prioritizing the display of content that relates to the current user action. And it seems like, again, a really common sense idea, and yet we've fallen away from this. I see many, many, many waterfalls where there's a lot of non-critical content that's in the critical rendering path. And so I invite you to think about what's the critical rendering path for your own site, and what are the resources that you can get out of that critical rendering path. There's a great article you can read called The Fight for the Main Thread that just came out on Smashing. And in it, Geoff Graham, he talks about the main thread, defines it as a concept, and a few people have talked about the main thread today as well, so I won't kind of go into all of that again. But he does a really great job of breaking down not just what it is, but what are the elements that get in the way of that main thread activity. And he focuses quite closely on third parties, and doesn't just like kind of break it down and do an analysis of like, okay, this is what's blocking the main thread, but provides a lot of resources and kind of best practices and tips for actually doing the optimizations that you need to do there. So the purpose of my talk isn't to tell you what all of those things are, but I'm kind of like more of a traffic director. I want to kind of get you to the resources that you need. The other thing to think about when you're focusing on what matters is keeping in mind that not all pages are equal. And I did my undergrad thesis. I was an English literature major, which I don't know if a lot of other people here. Oh, thank you. Yeah, almost became an academic, just decided not to, thank goodness. Yeah, so I'm a big George Orwell fan. That's what I did my thesis on. And so, yeah, not all pages are equal. Some are more equal than others. A few years ago, participated in some research on conversion impact scoring, and also something called activity impact scoring, where looking at RUM data, we actually figured out that some pages matter more than others in terms of being faster and their impact on conversion rate. Some pages matter very little. And it's kind of surprising. So, for example, for a retail page, and this is looking at like millions and millions of beacons worth of data, the most important page to optimize is your product page. Least important page is search. Home is only kind of somewhere in the middle. And so if you're kind of starting at home because that's the first page, and you're doing that, kind of making that mistake of reading your website like it's a book, which Mark warned us not to do, not to think about our sites that way, then you're kind of doing it maybe not in a way that's best for your site and for your users and ultimately for your business. So product pages, category pages, the pages that actually have the real meat of your site are the pages that matter. For a media site, article pages, search pages, department pages, those are kind of the more important ones, but primarily those article pages. Homepage matters relatively little. So if you're, I'm kind of pointing these out to help you prioritize what pages to focus on. Find the low-hanging fruit. And what do we mean by this? It's a pretty, common expression. As my colleague Andy has said on stages, it's the dull, boring stuff. It's not exciting, it's not sexy, but it's the things that are probably the most common issues on your pages. Scripts, especially third parties, images, extraneous code, and undeferred resources. The dull, boring stuff. I did an audit of I did sort of an inventory of the most frequent lighthouse audits that were showing up on, we have an industry benchmarks dashboard that's public facing in Speed Curve. So I went through the sites in the benchmarks dashboard, and I just identified all the most common lighthouse audits, and they're here. And some of these have been discussed already today, which is great. And I'm not going to read them all out, but the most common one, if you go away and you only do one thing today, add your width and height attributes to your images if you want to improve CLS. And then there's a few others. One thing that I hope you can make out is that a lot of these are badged with the different Core Web Vital that they should help to improve. So you can see that there's a relationship between these audits and the actual Core Web Vital. So if you do nothing else, just take away this list, make sure you're doing these things on your own pages, and see what that does for you. It's really important, and this is kind of going back to the dull, boring stuff. Small changes, really small changes can have a surprisingly huge impact on your site. So this is a US site called Priceline, and this is their homepage. And they presented a case study a while back, and actually Tim Cadlick interviewed them for the Chasing Waterfalls podcast. It's a really, really good podcast. It's several episodes from really interesting people. So this is Malik Hakim, shared how all they did was they ran an A/B test where they shaved at 15 kilobytes off their logo, and they increased bookings. This is just one optimization, because the logo, when you think about it, that's in your critical rendering path. And if it's something that's less performant or really non-performant, just making that one tweak can make a huge difference. Another example, this is another US, it's a retail site called Fanatics. They sell sports gear for sports fans. And they did a few very basic optimizations, like they did some image compression, they deferred the sprite that was blocking the critical rendering path, and they optimized some CSS and JS on the critical rendering path. And what happened for them, just with these three kind of groups of optimizations, they had a 2-second improvement in the metric that they were tracking, which was load time, and they almost doubled their mobile conversions. So again, it's not necessarily the big things. It's really important also when it comes to focusing on the right things is managing people's expectations, including your own. So I think it's really easy to feel like you have to do all the things, you have to do everything well, you have to do everything right away, and that you have to make big changes to see big impacts. And so I'm going to kind of read this because it's a little bit of a mini essay from Dan Gale at Crate and Barrel. I don't know if this helps anyone, but one thing I've been stressing to our dev teams at Crate and Barrel is this. We're not trying to speed up the website by 500 milliseconds. We're trying to speed up the website by 100 milliseconds 5 times, or 50 milliseconds 10 times. There's more. Getting teams to think incrementally has proven to be more effective than trying to do everything all at once. It's less stressful. It's faster to implement. Everyone, including product managers, seems to just get it. Smaller projects get more buy-in than megalithic projects that span multiple sprints or multiple teams. So I think this was a really interesting kind of takeaway, because it's really easy to get caught up in this idea that you have to take on these really big, as Dan says, like megalithic projects where you're going to do some big performance sprint and you're going to try to get all the things done, and instead focus on small incremental changes. And as he says, it's not to say that large structural issues shouldn't be addressed someday, but while you're waiting for someday to come around, you can do what you can right now to improve in smaller chunks that ultimately add up. So again, it's not a super sexy, exciting takeaway. It's very small and unsexy, but ultimately really effective. Another really important thing to do in terms of just managing expectations is to understand your performance plateau. So your performance plateau is the point at which, even if you're making improvements to your pages, you're not seeing any impact or any really noticeable impact to things like conversion rate or to bounce rate. And the reason is because you've bottomed out in terms of business and user engagement metrics. So what that means is There's a couple of charts. This is a correlation chart where you can see LCP in these cohorts in the histogram, and then bounce rate is the blue line that's kind of running across there. And what you can see is how bounce rate goes from almost 50% at 0.5 seconds to 84% at 9.5 seconds. And that whole trajectory is where making changes is going to have an impact on your business or UX metrics. If you look beyond that, you see that's your plateau. And so you can make your page, if you have pages that are 16 seconds, which I hope you don't, and you get them to 10 seconds, and you think, wow, we just did a lot of work. We shaved 6 seconds off our load time, and yet it didn't make a difference in what we're doing on the business side of the UX side. That can be really disheartening. And this is why you need to know, using your RUM data, what your plateau is and what you need to do to get off that plateau into that trajectory where you're making a difference. And it varies from site to site, which is why you need to look at your own data. These are not benchmarks that you should be aiming for. This is another correlation chart where you can see the plateau comes in a lot earlier at like 2.5 seconds. So it really does vary from site to site. Fighting regression. While you're doing the things that you're doing to make your pages faster, you really need to keep an eye on not making sure your pages aren't getting slower. And again, it sounds like a really obvious thing to say, but it's amazing how many times I speak with people who aren't implementing tools, strategies for doing this. This comes from that Sauce Labs poll that I mentioned earlier. 67% of developers in that poll said that they push code without testing first. Only 33%, like 1/3, are testing their code changes before they deploy it, or at least at deploy. And this one kind of blew me away. About 60% of developers are pushing ChatGPT generated code without testing it. And I don't I'm not here to diss ChatGPT. I think there are advantages to it, and I know people who use ChatGPT well to generate code. It's just this idea of pushing untested code is a little bit like, whoa. But it boils back to what we were talking about earlier, the fact that 77% of developers have assumed more responsibility for testing. If you're taking on that load, something's got to give. And maybe some of that is that you're just not going to test everything that you push live. So I'm sympathetic to that as a real problem. I really like this quote from Renato Sinahara at West Wing. My company used to do focus weeks for performance, and I found that to be ineffective. So we now have a continuous process for monitoring and improvement, and it works much better. I'm not going to read all of this, but basically, in this, he talks about a few different strategies for what people were doing, like just frequent monitoring, having meetings, just this idea of integrating your performance testing with your continuous kind of development process. This is where performance budgets come in. And so I'm not going to ask people who's using performance budgets, but who is familiar with the idea of performance budgets? Okay. So that was about half the group. I did a talk on performance budgets last year, and it's a really important concept that I feel, again, everybody's really busy. It's taking on the additional load of learning about how to use a new strategy can be time consuming, but it is, once you've grasped the concept of performance budgets and you've put them in place on your own site, it's the easiest way to make sure that you are automating how you make sure that you don't push performance regressions onto your live site. And so what is a performance budget? Well, it's a threshold that you set for whatever metrics are important on your own site. So this is an example of one that's on CLS. And what a performance budget allows you to see is, A, what your budget is that red line, and where you go in and out of bounds. And so in this case, you can see the budget got violated a bunch of times, and it kind of stayed above the threshold for a prolonged period of time. It's really important. Oh, and if you go to the link, it's just a guide to performance budgets with a lot of best practices in there based on the talk that I did last year. It's really important to keep in mind that a performance budget is not a performance goal. It's great if you want to have a start render of 2 seconds because that's how fast your your fastest competitor is, but that's just something to work towards. It's not your budget. Your budget is something that you put into place to fight regressions. And the great thing about performance budgets is that you can automate them and you can integrate them into your CI process. You can create performance budgets. That then once you make any changes to your code or your content, it can trigger a test. You can set up the testing to happen on your dev site. You can maybe, and you can even have your budgets set up so that you break the build and you don't push non-performant code to your live site. So there's a lot of kind of wiggle room with how to implement performance budgets on your site. But if you're not using performance budgets right now, I really, really can't urge you strongly enough to do some research and figure out a way to do that, and to do it in a really accessible, easy way. Even if you're just figuring out what is one metric that matters, Start Render is a good one to start with because it does often correlate to meaningful user outcomes, business metrics, things like that, and because it's available in Rum and Synthetic, and because it's supported by all browsers. So I really do recommend that as something to consider. And the way to think about performance budgets is and performance budgets and how they work with your CI process is your performance budget is kind of like having a motion sensor in an environment you want to have secure. So if you're if something unsafe seems to happen, something unfamiliar enters the room, the motion sensor goes off. And that's great. Integrating it with your CI process and automating it is like having your motion sensor then send a SWAT team into your environment to get the bad guys out of there so they don't do anything. So I really recommend it. And as I said before, I'm a big proponent of MVB, minimum viable budgets. So even if it's, as I said, just one metric and you're just experimenting with that, I really encourage you to do that. It doesn't have to be Core Web Vitals. That can be something to start with as well. The important thing is to go back to, say, your synthetic tests where you're able to generate visuals like film strips and line up whatever metric you're looking at, whether it's Start Render or any of the other metrics, with the film strip to make sure that it actually lines up with something that is visible in the viewport. I did an audit a little while ago of a bunch of different metrics and kind of the pros and cons of each. I wish that there was one kind of perfect unicorn metric that I could point everybody towards. But this is kind of me auditing a bunch of different metrics, common metrics, and maybe some less common ones like Last Painted Hero or long tasks, which you might have learned more about earlier today. But these are metrics for you to explore and kind of test in your own environment. Make sure that you share the load. And this is a really hard thing to do, especially if we're really busy. And this is kind of I find it sort of one of those things that if you're a person who in your day-to-day life just feels like, well, if I want it done right, I should do it myself. Or if everybody else is really busy, so I'll do it myself. We can always make reasons for why we're going to do it ourselves. We don't have the time to teach other people how to do things. There's so many reasons, but I really encourage you to find ways to share the load with what you're doing, even if your team is much tinier than it used to be, even if right now you don't feel like you have a team, if there's just one person. Everyone who touches a page should care about the performance of that page. Everyone, not just developers. I like this. It's another podcast interview this is with Dan Chilton, who used to be at Vox Media. And he said and his performance team at the time was that they didn't want to set themselves up to be performance cops, but they did want to involve people throughout the organization and create multidisciplinary teams. They didn't want to slap people on the wrist saying, you did a bad thing. They wanted to help people to basically set up best practices, teach people about those best practices, set up systems, teach people about those systems, and then ultimately make people responsible for the systems and make people excited about the systems, whether it's a performance budget or anything else that you're doing in terms of your performing or your monitoring. So it's really important, as hard as it is, to give people ownership. So for example, if your marketing team is responsible for adding and maintaining third-party tags, you should, logically, Make sure they understand the metrics that those tags affect, such as long task time. You should get them to collaborate on setting the budget. They should receive alerts, not just you, when the budget is violated, so they can know when that's happening. And they should at least have visibility, even if they're not directly involved, in making the fixes that they need to make to fix your long task time and get that non-performant third party out of there or make it better. Also, you need to have a champion higher up. And I can't stress this enough. If you need to have somebody who is at the highest possible level of seniority in your company who cares about performance, and you need to help them understand why they care. And often that comes down to talking about the business metrics that your site has direct impact on. So find that champion, and having a champion higher up in the organization will make your life so much easier. And so I find that that's actually one of the things that when I talk with people over the past year or so, they've lost their performance champion due to reorgs, due to people leaving the company, that sort of thing. And if there's one thing that you can do for yourself to make your kind of just your work culture, your performance culture at your company better, it would be to find that person. You need to measure success. Again, this is from the interview with Malik Hakim. We as engineers should learn how to show the impact on anything we do. So for example, if you have a competitive benchmarking dashboard, you should be able to quantify. We moved from 6th place to 3rd place in our competitive dashboard. This is what a competitive dashboard can look like with film strip views that are stacked in order of, I think this one is stacked in order of start render. And moving up the leaderboard, having a leaderboard like this and this has been a feature that's been available in web page test and other tools like SpeedCurve that are built on our own instances of web page test, but it's a really incredibly valuable tool to be able to kind of show people in your organization where you rank compared to competitors, or where you rank compared to the kind of best in breed retail sites. Or we optimized or removed a third party and reduced bounce rate from 87.5% to 62.1%. Harry did a really great case study in a presentation he did here at Perf.now in 2019, where he just showed an A/B test where they were experimenting with a third party, and that's where I got that particular stat. If you are not running A/B tests, and I recommend that you consider doing that. There are a lot of resources and case studies that you can find at this URL, and just kind of looking online, but just be the ability to do A/B tests so that people in your org can see, we changed one thing on our page, like we deferred some third parties, or we optimized an image and we saw some very tangible, measurable change in our business metrics, not just in our performance metrics. Or we improved LCP by 0.8 seconds, and we increased conversions by 4.2 to 5.3%. These, again, based on real case studies. All of these things are very measurable if you're using synthetic and RUM tools together. And if you are tracking conversions and or even just bounce rate. Conversion tracking is a little bit trickier because you have to kind of bring in conversion data, but you can at least create correlation charts using bounce rate, because that's available in RUM tools, or most or all RUM tools right out of the box. It's very easy to measure. And often if you can, I've looked at a lot of correlation charts. Generally, you can use bounce rate as a proxy for conversions. If you're making UX better for people and improving bounce rate, you're almost probably improving conversions as well. Or you can even just say like what you prevented. We prevented 3 regressions to LCP from going live. And based on what we know about LCP and its impact on our conversion rate, we prevented a degradation to conversion rate. So just celebrating things that you stopped are really important as well. And when I say celebrate, I mean, I don't know what celebration looks like to you, but a common problem with high-performing people is that we do these hard things and we don't pause and look around and, congratulate ourselves for doing hard things. We just move on to the next hard thing. So you wouldn't climb a mountain, get to the top, and then just be looking at your feet the whole time, and then just be like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to go down now. Like, you would stop, you would take some pictures, and you would, pat yourself on the back or give yourself a hug. Do those things in your performance work as well. And that can take a lot of different forms, depending on what kind of feels authentic and enjoyable for you. So it can take the form of just, I love this one from Nicholas Hoazi. He just posted like this boring chart because his CLS is 0, which is great, it's achievable, and it stayed 0. Fantastic. That's a win. And he posted it on his blog and on Twitter, and I loved it. You can ring the bell for other people as well. Sometimes people aren't great at kind of shouting their own victories out. Most of us aren't. So do that for other people in your team. At Etsy, I don't know if Etsy still does this, and there are a few folks from Etsy here, so maybe we can ask them at one of the breaks. They used to have performance heroes, and they would kind of like shout out, and they would broadcast on social media who their performance hero of the month was, and they would be really specific about it. This person removed a non-performant piece of JavaScript, or this person figured out a way to like fix some image optimization, and it made a big difference in some metrics that we care about. And it's really cute. And I like that there's like a little certificate that you get. You can write a case study if you've got the time and the wherewithal, and then you can send it to WPO Stats, and we'll post it there. And that's a great way to celebrate some wins as well. At SpeedCurve, we have a Slack channel called Ring the Bell, and we post anything there. If we're proud of it, we're excited about it, it's a ring the bell moment, we post it there. And so you could even just do it in your own Slack. And it's one of my favorite channels. So just to sum up, how to increase your impact, identify your critical rendering path, focus on it before you focus on other things. Focus on the pages that matter. Fix the low-hanging fruit. Manage expectations, other people's expectations, your own expectations. Definitely, please use performance budgets to fight regressions. Otherwise, you're doing all this work on optimizations over here, not realizing that, if you're lucky, maybe you're just like leveling things out because there's degradation happening over here, and you're not going to understand why your optimizations aren't making things better. Quantify your successes so that you can brag about them, so that you can build performance culture in your company, so that you can increase your level of championship from kind of management and executive levels in your company. You really just need to be able to quantify things. And those kind of brag statements that I shared earlier, like, we fixed this metric and we made conversions better. Those are just simple statements you can use and should use because the things everybody can get behind. So there's no magic at all. It's very simple. I know the work is actually hard when you actually have to do it, but the principles, the first principles to come back to are just that you need to have a plan, show up every day, do the work, be patient, and while you're doing that, just be really kind. And I think of kindness as having is really an umbrella concept. You want to be kind to your teammates and support them in what they're doing. You want to be kind to your users by delivering, hopefully, delightful, joyous user experiences. And really be kind to yourself, because I think it's really easy when we're in tough times as we are right now to be really, really hard on ourselves and to feel like even, treading water and staying in place isn't enough. Sometimes treading in water and staying in place is enough, and it's great that you're doing that. So I just really want people to keep that in mind as well. So thank you very much. Thanks for having me. And I can't resist citing sources, so here you go.
Thank you, Tammy. Thanks so much. How do you feel about perching over here?
I feel like I'm going to climb a mountain.
Oh, look at this. Using the step. It's bold.
No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be a leaner.
Okay, well, I'll lean as well. I'll lean, and we can both be jaunty. Thank you for such a thoughtful talk. I love the the level of thought and like the care that goes into a talk like that, because it's very easy. I mean, I've done this in the past. I've done lots of finger wagging and saying, "Oh, we should do this. We should make this better." And I think your message at the end there is a valuable one. So that's less of a comment and less of a question and more of a comment. We thought we were done with those, didn't we? Okay, but actually onto a question. You kind of talk about running towards the problem, and you talked about asking yourself, am I making my organization care about performance? And one of the things that I've always found difficult is how to make the right stakeholders care about it, and how to raise the visibility of those things. So I'd ask about that, and I guess as a bit of a run-on, I'm going to combine this with another question which came in, which is talks about case studies, and says a lot of case studies cite really high impact numbers. Customers struggle to trust them. So how do you know what's real and what's just sliced and cherry-picked data? So maybe those questions, I don't know, maybe relate to each other a little bit, but there we are.
I'm a little jet-lagged, so I already forgot your first question.
Okay,
I'm not good with two-parters.
That's fair. How do we make stakeholders care about performance in the first place is the big part.
Yeah, well, actually, and the answer to that kind of like does sort of answer the second question as well, which is that it's really hard to get people to care with data that isn't your own. So this is where other people's case studies, like that works for some people just to kind of capture their interest, but to hold their interest, you're really going to want to get as quickly as possible into looking at your own data. So learning how to run an A/B test on your own site, and learning how to create a competitive benchmarking dashboard, for example.
Right.
So just all of those things. And figuring out kind of what are the metrics that matter to the person that you're speaking with.
Right.
I didn't really kind of go into a lot of detail on this because I feel like I've talked about this a lot in other talks that I've done. But there is a UX or business metric that matters to every person at your company, whether they care about performance or not, or whether they think they care about performance or not. They care about bounce rate. They care about user retention. They care about page views if they're a media site. They care about SEO. They care about all of those things. And so you have to tailor the metric that you are focusing on as an outcome metric to the person that you're speaking with. And then I also firmly believe that you can find a performance metric, and it's usually one of the metrics that I mentioned before, like start render, or some of the more UX-oriented metrics, like maybe LCP or last painted hero, that really, if you create a correlation chart using your own data, you can see that there's a really strong correlation between that metric and user behavior or conversions. So it really just does come down to the fact that you need to have your own data. And I hear all the time, like, well, why would I believe a case study that somebody else has done? Maybe they are cherry picking their data. Nobody believes in it until they look at their own numbers.
Right. Yeah, and maybe that kind of other data, that cherry picked or that other case study data, might not be a good instigator for actually doing the work, but it might be a good instigator for, well, let's look at our own data and prove it. So that's
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still blown away by the 15 kilobyte reduction in just a logo.
That was an A/B test. So like it's the reason why how many people here actually are do A/B tests, like performance related A/B tests? So a few. Quite a few, not most. So what I love about A/B tests is the fact that you are basically testing the same page with some variable change in the same time frame. So it's not we did a performance sprint and we made some metric better and conversions improved, but it could also be because we did some kind of ad campaign that happened, during this part of the phase of operations, like after the sprint, or the content changed or the offer changed in some way. So doing A/B tests or multivariate testing is really kind of the way to go if you really want something kind of meaty that people can believe in.
Right, and that seems to marry quite nicely as well with that wonderful bit of advice about, we're not going for 500 millisecond improvement. We're hoping for 50 millisecond improvement 10 times. And because, if you're going for a smaller change, that's probably easier to test and easier to measure and kind of isolate, I suppose. A question I did have about that is how do we make the impact of that visible as well? And because that is something that I guess happens over time, gradually. And so again, like making these reports visible and taking those to the right people seems like a really important thing to kind of get the buy-in to continue that work over a long period of time.
I think it's almost like what you don't want to do. So What you don't want to do is show people a million charts or spreadsheets or things like that. It like really does come down to like, what is that impact statement that you want to say? And you should obviously have all the data you need to kind of back it up. But most people don't want to look at charts. Like, I mean, everybody in this room likes charts, but people outside this room don't. Making things as simple as possible, not obfuscating the very clear win or goal that you have with a lot of other stuff. So, yeah.
Nice. You're definitely right about this room loving charts. There was an audible intake of breath at the point that you put Nicholas's chart up with the straight line, where haven't broken it yet. Amazing. I feel like there are so many more questions I'd love to ask you, but we're kind of out of time. So you're around for some of this evening and tomorrow, and
I'm here. I basically live here for the next.
There you go.
Like
Tammy basically lives here, so you'll be able to ask your questions directly. Tammy, thanks so much for a wonderful talk and for hanging out and chatting a little bit as well. Big round of applause, please, for Tammy Everts.